there's nothing wrong with you. You're too young to be sick.
Yep, happened to
And
me
it's
too.
just, it's absurd. At one point, a kid beat me up, like literally beat me on the playground. A lot of people believe that only boys can have autism, and people believe that you can grow out of it and that it can be fixed. You can be taught to be normal, and that's just not how it works.
All interviews done are real, unscripted, and edited for your viewing experience. Remember that things impact people differently, so please do not compare people's traumas or experiences. Remember to see the humanity in everyone and treat them and those in the comments with kindness. Hey guys, it's Aless. Thanks for clicking on this video. I'm so excited to introduce you guys the first episode of this project that I was thinking of since the beginning of the summer. However, due to unprecedented circumstances, everything was pushed back a bit, but no worries because here we have the first episode. Special shout out to Lady Patriquin for being in this video and sharing her experiences. Remember, if you have a story that you want to get out there, let me know down below in the comments and I will either reach out to you outside of YouTube or you can contact me directly through my business email. Without further ado, let's get on with this interview. Hi guys, so we have our first guest here.
Hi, I'm Lady Patriquin. I am going to talk about discovering that I was autistic as an adult and just generally being disabled and living disabled and neurodivergent.
Thank you for being willing to come on and share it. You know, I'm really interested actually because I actually, and this is actually true, when I was in 8th grade, I did work in a classroom that had kids, you know, with special needs, and it's interesting to see how their brain functions. So I really am interested in what you're going to share with me.
My entire life, I've known that I was different and I didn't fit in and I wasn't the same as other kids. There was just never really an explanation for it. Like, I was the weird kid, I was the misfit, I got bullied really bad, particularly in middle school. Just before 5th grade, I had moved and switched school systems, and my teacher in 5th grade kind of like realized, you know, that something's not right here. Like, she's having issues and she's really struggling in ways that the other kids aren't. And she asked my parents, you know, has she been tested? Have you done the learning disabilities, like all that? Has she been tested? And my parents actually lied to the school and said that, oh yeah, she's been tested. She's fine. There's nothing wrong with her.
Why did they do that? Is it because they didn't want you to be isolated from the kids, or they didn't want, you know, for you to be put in like separate classrooms and learn differently? Like, what was the reason?
I'm not sure entirely, but I think it goes back to my mother was an alcoholic and she drank heavily when she was pregnant with me. I think that she's always had this shame and this fear that whatever is wrong with me is her fault.
I see.
You know, that's always been my thought on it. My mom has a lot of issues herself. Denial is a big one. She lives in a lot of denial about the things that are going on around her. And it was just kind of something that she couldn't cope with. Like, she couldn't cope with her kid being different or her kid being disabled. And so, you know, she just told everyone that I was fine and I was normal and it wasn't a big deal. And, you know, I'm in my 30s now and I'm still processing like how much trauma that decision caused me. Because if I could have been diagnosed as a kid, if I could have had the supports in place that I needed, especially in school, like what a difference that would have made in my life. So it's really unfortunate that she was so afraid of a label, afraid of a diagnosis. It's interesting with what I know now that I did get some diagnoses when I was really young that I now know are related to autism, that no one told us at the time were related to autism. So there were signs throughout my childhood, and especially now, knowing what I know about autism and looking back, and it's like, it's so blatantly obvious that it's like, how could anyone have missed it? I think my mom's just always been really ashamed and embarrassed and couldn't admit that there was anything wrong with me. You know, as an adult, now that I know about autism and I know that it runs in families, I can look at my mom and see the autism in her and be like, oh, that explains that behavior and that explains that. There's no ability for me to even like have a conversation with her about it because she is like so hardcore in denial that I can't even have this conversation with her at all. Like, even if I got a diagnosis, I don't think she would accept it.
Really? After all these years, she wouldn't?
I don't think so, no. Because, like, she has a lot of mental illness herself, and she refuses to admit that she even has problems or get help at all. Because she's just like, no, I'm fine. I don't need therapy.
It is a common pattern I see with people, even like in my personal life, where they feel like it's everybody else that has the problem and not them. And maybe it's kind of denial, but also because maybe people feel like if they go get help, they're admitting defeat and they're not strong, especially, you know, with this conversation that, you know, men have to be strong, and if they get help or therapy, they're weak. And I mean, that's a separate conversation, but I mean, that could possibly be an answer because I see that a lot in our society.
It's definitely like a generational thing too. So, like, my family is everything is a secret and you don't tell anyone anything, especially when it comes to medical stuff. Like, even if you're in the hospital, like, dying and need emergency surgery, you don't tell anybody. And so that's been, like, a huge issue in my family that, you know, the younger generations, we're working on breaking that.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm really open and really honest about everything that I go through, and I just hope that it is, you know, having an effect on the older generations and kind of, you know, showing them like it's okay to admit these things. Like, I was just with my cousin the other day. She's elderly and she has, you know, a bunch of health problems. She's starting to have mobility issues. She texted me out of nowhere and she's just like, I need help right now. And I'm just like, okay, what do you need help with? And then she like she was being super cryptic and took forever to even like tell me what was going on. So it turns out that her apartment was getting inspected and she needed to move a bunch of her stuff into storage so that she would pass the inspection. So her niece, my other cousin, was already there helping her. She couldn't do it all by herself. And so she's like, you know, yeah, you need to ask Lady to help. She was so like weird about it, like didn't want to tell me what was going on. And then she finally told me, she was like, I need you to come move stuff. My mom drove me over there and dropped me off. And I spent the day yesterday moving like half of my cousin's apartment. We actually had some conversations about, you know, because she's talking about she's having all these problems with her hip and all this pain, and telling her, I'm like, well, I have sciatica in both hips. You know, it sounds like you have sciatica. And I was like, physical therapy really helps with sciatica. And just talking about disability and how I'm like, you know, I'm 32 and I'm already like beyond the point that you're at as far as like mobility issues and not being able to do things. She's like, oh, you're too young. And like, no. And I told her, I was like, disability can happen at any age. You can be born disabled. Like, there's no such thing as being too young to be disabled or to have these problems. And that's like a big, I don't know, stereotype or misconception that people have. And I've actually run into that with doctors where I've been completely dismissed by doctors who have told me, you're too young. There's nothing wrong with you. You're too young to be sick.
Yep. Happened to me too.
And it's absurd. It's absurd. Like, you're a doctor. Like, you should know that this stuff can happen to anyone. Like,
and they blame everything on stress. Like, if they don't know what you have, they'll just be like, it's stress, it's anxiety. You're too young to feel that.
So many doctors just don't even like want to bother to try to figure out what's wrong. I actually had to change my regular doctor last year because the one I had was just super dismissive of any issue I had. I would go to her and she'd just be like, well, I don't see anything wrong. You're fine. And it's like, I'm not fine. I'm in pain and I can't live my life normally. Like, something is obviously going on. A lot of times you'll see disabled people are just like, I don't have the energy. I don't have the mental capacity. I don't have the energy to go through the whole process of like filing complaints and figuring out who I have to call and what paperwork to fill out. And it's like having to deal with that on top of like not getting treatment and being sick and disabled is like, it's usually just too much for people to deal with. In my case, I'm actually supposed to have a support person, like a mental health, like government appointed support person. And I don't. I really struggle with anything that involves like making phone calls and doing paperwork. And I don't have any support in that area that I'm supposed to.
Well, here we are. You're sharing your story, and I'm glad you were comfortable to, come on and share.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm one of the people that's kind of fallen through the cracks in the system. The Department of Mental Health was supposed to help me, and the person I was supposed to be in contact with, we couldn't ever actually get on the phone with each other, and then she finally just stopped calling me back. I guess I'm kind of easily defeated, but I kind of just gave up, and it's like, okay, well, they're not going to help me, so I don't know what to do now. I don't know where to go. So the program that I was in, and I was in this program for like 5 years, they were horrible. Just absolutely a mess. Way too many caseloads and not enough caseworkers. You're supposed to see every one of your cases like every week. And there was no physical way that these workers could see all of their cases in a week because they just had too many. These workers would just burn out and quit. And then you would just be like, what, you wouldn't even know what was going on. I just got bounced from worker to worker to worker. And in 5 years of being with this program, I had one worker for a span of like 8 months that actually met with me and helped me.
Right. I definitely see, like, even here, the wait times for, like, mental health support is crazy. I saw, like, a therapist for a few weeks. I had to pay out of pocket private. Other than that, like, even just medical in general, there's so many shortages and it's staff crisis, and it's just crazy because with mental health, I think that's why I want to work in this field, because there needs to be more people. So you mentioned how it affected you in childhood, and then you brought up some other points. What about from like 13 to 19? So like teenagehood, if that's a word.
So in high school, it's weird because like looking back, it's like high school was my best period, but also like one of my worst periods. Academically, I had always really, really struggled in certain subjects. And like, I'm really academically inclined. I was reading at a college level by third grade. Like I was, what would be considered like gifted. I don't know if it was just the school systems I was in, like didn't have those kind of like gifted programs. But I was never put in any kind of special like programs for anything. But there were certain subjects that I always struggled with, in particular math. Yeah. And it was really interesting because when I was in 8th grade, I almost failed math, and they were talking about possibly holding me back. So then when I went to high school, my high school had it was like a special way that they broke up certain subjects where if you were struggling, like in math or in English, instead of having like an entire year of math, they would break it up over 2 years. It was this weird thing where when I went to high school, it was kind of like a switch just flipped. And like all of a sudden, math made sense. And it was just like, oh, I get it now. And I got really good at math, like instantly. I was getting like straight A's. And it was just like, I can't even explain it. But I started doing really, really, really well in school. And so then it was like, oh, well, I really shouldn't be in these classes. I should be in the regular classes. But by that point, it was too late for me to switch. So I was stuck in these kind of, for students who were struggling, who were in danger of being held back, that kind of thing. So it wasn't necessarily with like the greatest classmate. The other kids that were in my classes being disruptive and causing distractions and things like that. Overall, academically, I made honor roll every term, every year. So I did really well in high school. And I think part of that was actually just not so much focusing on the other kids and it being more about the work. And there wasn't as much of the social dynamic that you have in younger grades. One thing I've always struggled with is group projects. That was something I always had. I never wanted to do group projects.
Yeah, me too.
Because literally everyone else in the group would just slack off, and it would be like me and maybe one other person doing all the work. Pretty much I prefer to be by myself doing my own work.
Exactly. Yeah. So you mentioned how it affected you as like a teenager or in high school. Did it affect your social life or like relationships, or how did it affect you with like friends?
I guess I just, like, when I was in school, I always had like a really small friend group where like it was just, there was like a handful of people that I was close with, and then just being friendly with everyone else. It really wasn't until middle school that I really started having issues with certain kids bullying me. And there was a couple of issues with specific kids where like serious action was taken by the school because the bullying got so bad. And I guess I'm lucky. I hear so many horror stories. I guess I'm lucky that the school like took it seriously. At one point, a kid beat me up, like literally beat me on the playground.
Oh my goodness.
And apparently, I found out later, apparently it was because he liked me.
Oh, not that thing about if boys are mean to you, they like you.
I know. But they ended up, like, they took his locker was right next to me, so they took his locker away. So he was suspended. And then he was like super remorseful after that, and he felt really bad. And he had issues too. Like, he was in the special ed class. I've never like really held it against him because like he wasn't a bad kid. He just really struggled, and especially with like social dynamic stuff. So like I never held it against him really. But there were other kids later on who were just horrifically cruel, who, you know, my whole experience with them was just traumatizing. And it's just like the best thing was to just get out of that school and never have to see those people again. After high school, it was just kind of like it crashed and burned hard after high school, like really bad. Like a big thing with autistic people is needing schedule and needing to know what's happening and to have consistency. So the only schedule and consistency that I had in my life was school and was my school schedule. And so when all of a sudden I didn't have school anymore, my whole world fell apart. And that was when my anxiety, my depression, everything spiraled out of control for me.
You know what? This is really relatable because since right now, like, I don't have school and I probably don't have to go for another little bit, I feel that because now that I don't have a schedule and routine, I felt myself kind of getting overwhelmed. And even people with anxiety, I feel like we need routines and stuff. So I definitely relate on that.
Yeah. So I was struggling a bit in high school with depression and anxiety. And I had friends who had anxiety that was like way more severe than me. Finally, you know, it got to the point where they're like, you know, you need to be evaluated. And so this time my parents agreed and they took me to a psychiatrist. And I was diagnosed at 17 with a whole bunch of stuff: severe social anxiety, severe depression, OCD, ADHD, bipolar, and PTSD, all in one go. One of the weird things was that nobody at that time really like sat down or explained to me what any of these diagnoses were, like what it meant or like how it could affect me. So like I had the labels, but I didn't really know what it meant. I've been in therapy since I was like 12. So I'm very familiar with therapy and all that. So I started seeing a new therapist at that point. I was trying out all these different meds, and they're like having to adjust the doses. And there was stuff that I got put on that like made me really sick. And so it's like I would get to school every day and throw up. It was this whole big thing. It was literally the same class every day. I would have to run out of class and go to the bathroom and throw up. And it got to the point where the teacher thought I was faking. And then one day he wouldn't let me go. And I ended up just grabbing the trash barrel and throwing up in class. That was when he realized I wasn't faking. And he was like, what is going on? And I was like, it's this medication I'm taking. And he's like, well, you need to tell them that you can't take this medication. Like, this isn't okay. So it was a lot of stuff like that. There was an ADHD med kept saying, oh, well, you're adjusting to the dose. So like it wasn't working because they're like, oh, you're just adjusting to the dose. So they just kept upping it and upping it and upping it. Okay. I weighed 87 pounds in high school and they had me on like these crazy high doses of these pills. I'm super sensitive to medication. I got to the point where I felt like I was having a heart attack in math class one day. Like I literally thought I was going to die. And now I know that it was probably a panic attack and not actually anything to do with my heart. But at the time, you know, obviously I didn't know that. And it was terrifying. And I thought I was going to drop dead in math class. We just kind of realized that like I can't do stimulants. And stimulants are like the typical medication that you would do for ADHD. The thing I actually found that worked for me when I was in my early 20s, my meds doctor, who I loved my meds doctor, she was fantastic. And she just had this list of like all the psych meds broken down in categories. And we just went down the list and we just tried every single one. And we figured out, well, what works, what has side effects that you can't deal with, what doesn't work. She put me on an antidepressant for my ADHD and I was taking it every other day. The best like ADHD medication that I've been on, like that actually helped way more than any of the like traditional ADHD meds. The whole meds thing is actually one of the reasons that I'm now questioning the ADHD diagnosis. One of the things with autistic women is that we're often misdiagnosed. And some of the most common misdiagnoses are ADHD and mood disorders, which I was diagnosed with both. And I really just don't fit those because I was diagnosed as bipolar, but I've never had bipolar behavior. That diagnosis has never fit. The more I learn, the more I realize these diagnoses maybe are not accurate. And so I'm trying to get evaluated. But like I've been trying for years and I haven't been able to even figure out how to get tested for anything. Looks like I'm going to have to do it myself. Like I'm just going to have to find facility that does the testing, which so far I found one in my state, emailed dozens of places, and only one place has said that they do testing. I'm trying to figure out if my insurance covers the testing or not, because the testing can cost thousands of dollars, which is one of the reasons that a lot of people can't get officially diagnosed, because the cost of getting tested is just prohibitively expensive. In the autistic community, self-diagnosis is valid because so many people are just not able to access official diagnosis. And then there's places where like you can get on a wait list, but you might be on the wait list for, 5, 8, 10 years. That's not even to mention all the issues with the actual diagnostic process itself, particularly pertaining to women. Diagnostic testing is based on the criteria of a white male cis child in distress, in crisis. And so obviously that doesn't fit to a grown adult woman at all, because autism presents very differently in women than it does in men. And that's one of the reasons it's often overlooked and missed in women. A lot of people believe that only boys can have autism, and people believe that you can grow out of it and that it can be fixed. You can be like taught to be normal, and that's just not how it works. There is one test that I am aware of that is specifically designed to detect autism in women. And as far as I'm aware, that test is only available in the UK. If I'm able to get it, it still might say, that I'm not, because it isn't designed to detect autism in women. Wow. Adult diagnosis is really tricky. And most people who deal with autism have little to no experience of autism in adults, which is just like shocking to me. But that seems to be the normal thing. That's why there's a big push in the autism community to get more autistic adults into fields that are like research based and therapy based, and to help other autistic individuals on a more personal level where they have actual experience.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. If you would like to continue to hear Lady Patriquin's story, where she goes into her experiences as an adult with her therapist, etc., please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, hit the bell so you don't miss the next episode. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!